Late light pours across Hebron's ridgelines like molten bronze, throwing long spears of shadow down the terraces. Wind moves through oaks that have watched empires blink. On the crest stands an old soldier with new fire in his eyes. 85, scar-mapped, back straight like a drawn bow. The hill he's facing is not polite. It is crowded with history and rumor, the place of patriarchs, a fortress town with giants posted like living walls. Most men at this age would ask for a quiet valley and a porch with a view. He asks for elevation and enemies. There's a hush in the camp, the kind you feel before a verdict. Lines have been drawn in quieter times, lots cast, boundaries inked. The allocation committee is ready to stamp settled. But this man who has outlived a generation's fear steps forward as if the last 45 years were a warm-up lap. I've carried this promise like a flint in my pocket, his posture says, and now I'm ready to strike the spark. He is not negotiating for comfort. He is testifying about a covenant and volunteering for difficulty as proof the covenant still holds. Consider the boardroom version promotions on the table departments being assigned. Everyone angles for the easy P&L, the portfolio with fewer fires. Then your oldest leader, steady, clear-eyed, asks for the turnaround nobody wants. Why not for a headline? Because his process is formed. Because he trusts what brought him this far. Because courage isn't noise, it's memory obeyed. Memory is doing heavy lifting here. He remembers grapes dragged like trophies between two men on a pole. He remembers the day numbers were stacked against them and fear won the poll. He remembers funerals in the desert stones, in the riverbed walls that fell to a trumpet's breath, and a skirmish that spiraled into defeat because of hidden rot. Therefore, he does not confuse hype for help, but he is not allergic to risk. Risk has never been the point. Promise has. Look at the ridge. Anakim's silhouettes move along battlements tall as bad news. Any strategist could make the case for safer ground. Leverage your strengths. Optimize for longevity. Diversify your threats. Nothing wrong with wisdom. But wisdom that edits obedience is just fear in a blazer. The old warrior isn't ignoring the obstacle. He's interpreting it. High ground. Therefore, a clearer stage for God's fidelity, but also a harder climb, so gather a team, stock the springs, and plan the approach. His voice when he speaks to Joshua isn't the tremor of nostalgia. It's the timbre of someone who has kept receipts. He doesn't claim he's as fast as 25. He claims he's as faithful as 40. Strength, he says, isn't a number on a birthday cake. It's a habit made of ordinary obediences repeated until they become a spine. He frames his request with verbs that matter. I followed fully. I held the line. I'm ready to act. Not I used to be brave, but I've stayed available. You can see the faces of the younger fighters in the crowd tilt toward him like flowers finding the sun. They grew up on stories of miracles they never saw. They have fought their fights, yes, but mostly with momentum at their backs. Now they watch someone whose momentum was interrupted for decades, who kept his soul from corrosion in the slow seasons, and it does something to them. His courage isn't a pep talk, it's a permission structure. If faithfulness can look like this at 85, what excuse exists at 28? He steps toward the ridge and names the mountain not as a trophy but as a trust. There is no swagger in him, but there is a settledness that unnerves cynicism. He knows the cost of presumption, I taught them, that therefore he pairs audacity with alignment. But he also knows the poverty of playing it safe when God has already spoken. He's not hunting a personal legend. He is stewarding a communal memory. This is the land of our fathers. This is where promise meets proof. Courage in this scene is not an emotion. It is the choreography of memory, obedience, and mission. Memory says God has been faithful to me in particular ways. Obedience says, therefore I will take the next clear step even when it looks strange. Mission says, but I will do it in a way that blesses those who come after me. Springs not just stones, homes not just headlines. Put differently, he's not trying to die on a hill, he's trying to live on one. And yes, giants still breathe up there. Therefore, says the old man's stance, We'll need a plan that outlasts adrenaline partners who will inherit the fight with me. Engineers of wells and terraces, teachers who will tell these stories without turning them into superstition. But his eyes add, we will not subtract the impossible simply because we are tired. His request is a rebuke to every lazy algorithm that assigns difficulty to the young and comfort to the old. Sometimes the oldest hands must grab the hardest rope so everyone sees how ropes are climbed. The sun drops a finger width. The decision is made. Papers signed in dust. The mountain is now a calling with a deadline. The camera holds on his face lined luminous, then tilts up to the ridgeline where the work waits. As we fade, hear the quiet thesis of this whole journey. Courage borrows certainty from who God has already proved himself to be, then spends that certainty on the next obedient hill. We started on the ridge to show the end game. Now we rewind to understand how a heart like this was built, how a 40-year, not yet forged, an 85-year I'm ready. True courage isn't loud. It's long. It remembers God's record, obeys the next clear thing, and asks for a hill that proves the promise, not the ego. Heat trembles above the Negev like a living veil as 12 men drop out of the hill country with dust on their ankles and a story in their eyes. 2 of them, Caleb and Joshua, carry a single cluster of grapes slung on a pole, so heavy it swings like a purple lantern between them. Behind the fruit trail, pomegranates like small suns and figs like clenched fists. The crowd inhales. This is not rumor. This is evidence you can taste. The report begins like a hymn. The land is good. Therefore, hope kicks in everyone's chest. But hope is fragile when it hasn't practiced. Maps unroll, voices stack. And then the pivot, however, the cities are fortified. The people are huge. The descendants of the Anak are there. A word can tilt a nation, however. You can feel the air go thin. Mothers squeeze children closer. Men who bragged about conquest 2 nights ago study their sandals. Caleb steps into the noise. He has learned that fear metabolizes fast unless interrupted. We should go up at once, he says. Not bluff, not bravado. A recalibration. If God has spoken, then delay breeds distortion. Therefore, move now while memory is fresh and the fruit still drips in your hands. But the majority is already editing the story to match their feelings. We seemed like grasshoppers to ourselves, they insist, and the line ricochets through the camp until imagination shrinks the people of promise to bug size. What you call yourself in your head decides what battles you will even attempt. The 10 spies don't simply deliver data. They curate dread. They stack odds until courage looks irresponsible. They offer statistics without the statistic that matters. Who will be with us? Caleb and Joshua aren't ignoring the walls. They're measuring them against a different reference point, a sigh that split a sky, that fed them a mountain that thundered. Courage for them isn't a feeling that cancels fear. It's a frame that puts fear in context. Night falls, and the rumor keeps working. Therefore, panic organizes itself into a plan. Elect a leader and go back to Egypt. But regression always dresses up as wisdom. Think of the children, they say, as if slavery were safer for sons and daughters than risk with God. Stones appear in hands for the minority voices. It takes almost no effort to form a mob when the story in the room is, we are small and the problem is big. Zoom to your world. The market review is glowing, demand unmistakable. Early adopters thrilled. Therefore, your team buzzes with ideas. But one slide says incumbents are massive, and the room tilts. Somebody whispers antitrust, or burn rate, or reputation risk, and suddenly the only safe plan is to retreat into what's familiar, even if familiar was killing you. We keep grapes on the table and still vote for Egypt because fear writes faster than faith unless someone interrupts the script. Caleb tries. He tears his clothes the ancient exclamation point and pleads for a better story. Not a naive one, a true one. If the Lord delights, he will bring us in. Translation. Don't make your identity the size of the obstacle. make it the faithfulness of the guide. Therefore do not rebel by refusing to move, but do not presume by moving without him. The camp is one decision away from becoming either a people of memory or a museum of missed moments. The question lingers timeless and close. Will you let fear be your narrator? Will you allow a single however to edit out everything God has already done? Kadesh is the incision point where a nation's self-talk becomes its future. 10 men sell a story of smallness, and millions buy it at full price. 2 men sell a story of promise, and for now the market isn't interested. Courage, it turns out, is often bad business before it becomes wisdom. When the evidence is good, but the odds look bad, choose your narrator. Name the however, then frame it under God's track record and move while the fruit is still in your hands. Morning finds the camp brittle. Fear hardened overnight into policy. Delegates circulate with serious faces and a draft plan that sounds prudent. Appoint a new leader, reverse course, head back to Egypt. Therefore, rebellion wears a suit. But treason against trust is still treason. Moses and Aaron fall on their faces. Joshua and Caleb rip their robes, voices cracking as they plead, "Don't throw away the future because today feels tall." The answer is pebbles gathered for a stoning. When panic feels like virtue, prophets look like threats. The cloud that has led them steps forward, not as soft shade, but as a witness. Judgment isn't a mood swing. It's the boundary that guards life. Therefore, God draws a line the nation would not draw for itself. The generation that chose slavery of the heart will not carry freedom on their backs. But mercy refuses to vanish. He will not erase the people. He will shepherd their children, the very ones fear claimed to protect. 2 names, Joshua and Caleb, are carved out of the decree like embers that refuse to go cold. The verdict lands like thunder. 40 years. One long lap around regret. Therefore, funerals become the national calendar. But even in the desert, school is in session. Manna trains daily trust. The tabernacle teaches presence. Discipline is not the absence of love. It is love refusing to let us worship our panic. The days acquire a rhythm, walking, burying, telling stories, trying again to believe. Under raw sun, a new generation learns what the last one wouldn't. Memory is a weapon, and obedience is oxygen. Grief provokes a reflex, some pivot into bravado. We'll go up anyway. A faction insists, grabbing weapons and charging toward the hill country without presence, without permission. Therefore, courage severed from obedience becomes suicide. But the lesson, bleeding and unmistakable, brands itself on the survivor's timing, is part of trusting. The road circles sand, mutters under sandals, and Caleb waits. Not passively, productively. He mentors, he remembers, he refuses bitterness. Waiting becomes the gym, where his hope keeps muscle. Zoom in on the quiet math of those years. Babies become boys, boys become men. Girls learn songs that are maps. Elders rehearse the Red Sea story until it coats their throats like honey. Therefore, when the river finally opens again, they will know how to walk through. But they will also know what not to carry, presumption shortcuts, and the itch to crown nostalgia as a god. Caleb watches the horizon, the way a sailor watches wind, not to complain about weather, but to be ready to hoist the sail the second the breath of God returns. By the time the decree runs out, the camp is different. Leaner, quieter, less impressed with crowd noise, more alert to presence. Judgment has done its severe work, and mercy has done its gentle one. The camera finds Caleb in the twilight of year 40 hands. Calloused eyes clear a man with decades of receipts. Therefore, when the story reopens at a river's edge and walls rise in the distance, his heart does not clatter like pots. It beats the steady drum of someone who outlived panic without letting hope die. God's not, yet isn't a void, it's a classroom. Let discipline anchor you, let mercy keep you, and let waiting become the place your courage grows, roots that can hold a mountain. The desert has a way of scraping the varnish off a soul. There are no crowds here to clap for you, no headlines to spike your adrenaline, just wine that tastes like salt and sun, that writes its name on your skin. Days stack like bleached bones. Therefore, monotony tempts a slow leak of meaning. But a different kind of muscle grows in the repetition. Manna at dawn tents struck tents set children taught elders remembering out loud. The schedule doesn't look heroic. It looks humane if you have the eyes for it. Graves multiply on the horizon, small mounds with bigger stories. You learn to speak in whispers around them. Therefore, grief could harden into cynicism. But God seeds the days with a liturgy of dependence so simple, it can't be faked. Bread nobody baked. Water from unlikely places. A fiery pillar in the cold. A cloud that walks. The tabernacle rises like a portable mountain, a center of gravity they carry wherever they go. Sacrifice teaches that holiness isn't a superstition for crisis days. It is the everyday shape of love. Caleb makes choices only he can make. He refuses the cheap dignity of complaining. He refuses the slow rot of nostalgia, the lie that Egypt was easier. He keeps his body honest with work, his mind honest with scripture, his memory honest with names, the elders who stood with him at Kadesh, the teenagers who'll need courage he can model. Therefore, he invests in the young teaching boys how to set stakes straight and tell stories straight. Teaching girls how to sing the truth until it outlives fear. But he never lowers the bar. Holiness is not a mood. It is a plumb line. There are sparks too. Moments that flare holy. A boy asks him, "Was the sea really two walls?" Caleb kneels in sand and draws it with his finger, then tells not only what happened, but what it did to a man inside. How terror became trust, one step at a time. Therefore, memory isn't just information. It's formation, truth metabolized into reflex. But memory unpracticed decays into trivia. So they practice. 12 stones become a family drill. What do these mean? They mean we cross with God or we don't cross at all. Leadership here is not the microphone kind. It is the maintenance kind. Fixing a neighbor's tent line before it frays. Returning a borrowed tool without being asked. Stopping a rumor instead of spreading it. Therefore, the camp becomes a school where ordinary obedience is contagious. But the desert also keeps a record moments of presumption, flashes of idolatry, the lure of shortcuts. Caleb watches the ground where others stumbled and marks it the way a guide marks a crevasse. Don't step there again. By year 20, you can tell who is being hollowed out and who is being carved. One looks like collapse, the other looks like capacity. Caleb's strength isn't loud, but it is noticeable, like a tree that learned to drink deep. Therefore, when conflict sparks, he is a quiet center others orbit. But he never confuses being needed with being entitled. He still takes last watch, still carries loads others drop, still prays with his eyes open to the wind, remembering a ridge he hasn't touched yet, and a God who doesn't need youth to keep promises. Maybe this is the secret the young can't see yet. Epic courage is built in unepic days. You become the kind of person who can say, "Give me this mountain," by saying, "Give me this chore 10,000 times without resentment." Therefore, when the pillar finally shifts north and the rumor of river water parts the conversation like a knife, Caleb is not scrambling to get in shape. But ready men don't rush. They move with the gait of those who trained during the silence. Hidden years aren't wasted years. Use repetition to build reflex grief, to deepen love and memory, to hardwire obedience so when the moment comes, courage is already your habit. It's spring, and the Jordan runs fat with snowmelt, a brown mussel thrashing between banks crowded with reeds. Villages upstream have already stacked sandbags against this annual mood swing. But Israel stands boot to water with priests shouldering the ark gold, flashing like caged daylight. Therefore, common sense says, wait for dry season. But obedience does not bargain with calendars. The order is simple, almost rude in its brevity. Step in. Caleb watches the priest's toes meet the current. It's not a cinematic leap. It's a modest choice that feels enormous to the ankle. Cold seizes bone. The river snarls around their shins, then buckles. Water draws itself up like a curtain tugged by an invisible hand piling far off at a town called Adam. Downstream, the bed yawns open with a sucking sigh. Therefore, the impossible becomes a road. But it requires someone to keep standing in the middle so everyone else can pass. Priesthood is often that holding still under weight so others can move into promise. The crossing is not a sprint. It's grandmothers, toddlers, animals, carts the clink of cookware. A nation walks through the ribcage of a river as if strolling a market lane while the men with the ark do not flinch. Caleb moves among the people like a shepherd, steadying a wheel, lifting a child, making eye contact with the skittish. He memorizes the sound of souls on riverbed and tells himself, remember this. Because adrenaline fades and without ritual memory evaporates, and courage along with it. Joshua interrupts the wonder with an instruction that feels like a nuisance until it turns out to be a gift. Pick up 12 stones from the middle where the priests stand. Not any stones, river-wet ones with the smell of silt and miracle. Therefore each tribe sends a man back into the bed to heave a rock onto his shoulder. But rocks are not stories, unless somebody tells them. Caleb grins at a boy who is watching and says, "This is how we borrow courage from today, for fights we haven't met yet." By sunset, the people are camped at Gilgal, and a cairn rises like a rough-hewn proclamation. It doesn't glow. It doesn't hum. It just sits there, daring forgetfulness to try its luck. That night, fathers and mothers rehearse the script Joshua wrote into the ritual. When your children ask, "What do these stones mean?" tell them the Lord cut a road through a river so we could walk into our future. Therefore, the stones become portable courage baked into family language. But rituals die when they are treated as museum pieces rather than living prompts. Caleb holds one of the stones in his lap. After the fire sighs low. It is heavy, the way truth is heavy. He thinks of Kadesh, of the 40-year sentence of funerals that taught him to number his days. He thinks of a mountain with giants and springs that need digging. He runs a thumb over the stone's water-worn skin and prays a quiet, stubborn prayer. Don't let me trade this memory for noise. Don't let victories turn into formulas. Keep my obedience simple and my courage borrowed, not manufactured. Morning brings logistics. Jericho's walls glare from the near horizon, its sentries no doubt rattled by the rumor of a river that stood to attention. Therefore confidence hums in the camp. But the first city will not fall by swagger. It will fall by a pattern that looks foolish until it's holy. A reminder that the God who parts water also designs the steps you take after the shore is dry. Caleb pockets a smaller stone, the kind you worry with your fingers, and tucks it in his belt. It will be his sermon note for the week. Remember the river when the walls refuse to care. There are seasons when the decision is not between good and bad, but between standing still with weight and leaving too soon. The priests will only step out when the last child has crossed. Courage sometimes looks like patience under pressure. Therefore, let others rest on the faith you carry. But do not mistake being used by God for being owed an easier assignment next. The road ahead includes strange instructions, a public failure, repentance, and recovery. The stones won't knock down a single wall. They will just keep you from forgetting who does. Obedience opens roads you can't see from the bank, and memory keeps those roads from fading. Name your stones, tell their story, and carry one forward to the next wall. Jericho stares like a dare, sun-baked stone stacked in confident geometry gates, bolted guards peering through murder holes. Israel's camp hums with sharpened spears and theories. Someone sketches ladders in dust, someone else argues for Ram's fire tunnels. Therefore, the problem seems solvable by hustle. But the assignment that arrives in Joshua's tent is a parade plan, not a playbook. Priests, trumpets the ark, silence 6 days of loops, then a shout. Strategy class grinds to a halt. Faith class begins. Day 1. They circle the city like a clock hand. Nobody taunts. Nobody negotiates. The only sound is sandals' breath and the ache of trumpets. Jericho's soldiers laugh from the wall. Therefore ridicule tests the spine. But obedience soaks deeper the longer it's carried. Caleb walks with the tribe of Judah counting stones, faces patterns in the mortar, not to find a weak spot, but to teach his eyes to stay where God placed the focus. If presence is in the middle, then process is your courage. Days 2 through 6 repeat like a stubborn chorus. The absurdity grows louder. So does the temptation to improvise. What if we add a skirmish? What if we scale a corner at night? Therefore the itch to help God along scratches at commander's nerves. But the order hasn't changed. Silence holds. Feet grind a trench of habit into the earth. Caleb watches young men wrestle boredom like a beast. He pulls one aside. You think courage is fireworks? Most days it's just not quitting the right thing. 7 dawns later, the formation looks ordinary. From a distance, one more lap around futility. But on this day, there are 7 circuits and acceleration of the strange. Then a pause that holds its breath. Trumpets lift. The long note threads the air. Therefore sound becomes a sledgehammer. But the real demolition began a week ago when trust outlasted taunt. Stone convulses, dust geysers up. The neat geometry folds like wet clay. The city that mastered war discovers it cannot master obedience. It doesn't understand. The band this city is devoted not plundered lands with moral weight. Therefore victory asks for restraint, but fresh success breeds entitlement. Caleb feels the tug of "we earned this" and names it what it is, a trapdoor. He walks past gold that could buy comfort at 85 and lets it glitter for someone else. He remembers the Jordan stones in his belt and the river road under priests' feet. We are as strong as what we refuse, he tells himself, and as safe as the presence we won't leverage. Jericho writes 2 axioms in his bones. First, when God is the strategist, obedience is the tactic. Second, walls fall on schedule that looks foolish until it's finished. Therefore, courage, real courage, can look repetitive, uneventful, even embarrassing. But it is doing something to you while you do it. It is fitting your heart for a harder hill tomorrow. And somewhere west Hebron's giants feel no tremor at Jericho's collapse. Which is fine. Caleb isn't collecting headlines. He's collecting habits that make mountains possible. Don't swap obedience for improvisation just because the method looks strange. When God owns the strategy, your job is to march hold and trust. Then steward the win with restraint. The morning after Jericho tastes like victory campfire stories. Reheat the moment the walls fell and swagger laces the sentences. Scouts jog back from a hill town named Ai with a shrug in their voices. Small place, they report. Don't tire the whole army. 2 or 3,000 will do. Therefore success edits memory into a shortcut. But holiness hasn't changed its requirements. Joshua nods, sends the light detachment, and the dust they kick up looks like confidence until it looks like panic. Men break, 36 fall. The gate that should have been a footnote becomes a headline written in blood. Joshua faceplants before the ark, with the same intensity he used to march around walls. Why is not blasphemy when it is the anatomy of trust? Therefore God answers the question they weren't asking. Not how many troops, but what kind of camp. Hidden theft from Jericho gold and garments buried under a family tent has turned their momentum into mud. The name is Achan, but the problem is communal. Israel is a body. Infection in one limb can stagger the whole frame. Courage, it seems, is not a standalone trait. It requires clean hands. The exposure is public because the wound is public. Lines form. Tribes, clans, households pass under searching eyes until a single man stands alone, heavy with secrecy. Therefore, repentance begins with truth spoken out loud, but confession without consequence is sentiment. The Valley of Achan, the place of trouble, becomes an anatomy class on holiness, how rot spreads, how it's cut out, how pain can be a surgeon saving a life. You can almost hear the air change in the camp grief, yes, but also clarity. Their God is not a mascot you wheel out for hard fights. He is a presence you dare not monetize. Then comes the reset. God speaks again, not to scold, but to lead. Do not fear. Strategy returns, this time braided with humility, scouts at night. An ambush behind the city, a feint to draw eye out, a signal of raised spear, a coordinated surge. Therefore, the same town that humiliated them becomes a lesson plan they won't forget. But the point isn't tactical brilliance, it's relational alignment. Obedience opens the door to creativity. When the trap springs, smoke lifts from eye like a second chance written in the sky. The spear stays raised until the work is complete, a visual reminder that courage is sustained, dependence, not a burst of adrenaline. When the ash settles, Joshua leads the people to build an altar. Read the covenant and write the law on stones. Therefore, they refuse to let victories be the only things commemorated. They also memorialize the moment they chose holiness over hype. But there's no gloating in their songs. They've learned that speed without soul is a liability. Caleb watches young fighters who survived both the rout and the redemption. He can see it on their faces. The new steel is not swagger, it's sobriety. They will need this for longer wars and higher hills. Zoom to us. We love efficiency and resent friction. Therefore, we are tempted to call the slow work of integrity optional, especially after a win. But I insists your private choices can veto your public battles. You don't have to be famous to be foundational. Be the hidden obedience that keeps a community's courage from collapsing at the gate. And when failure happens, because it will go to the valley where trouble is named, and build there the altar where mercy meets truth. Results without holiness are a trap. Clean hands make strong hearts. Deal with what's buried, realign under God, and let obedience, not momentum, power your courage. Victories flatten into logistics. Maps spread like quilts on rough tables. Names stack: Makkedah, Libnah, Lachish, Eglon, Hebron. Debir, until the list feels like rain on a tin roof. Therefore, momentum becomes a grind. But courage does some of its best work away from headlines. Years spool out under a sun that does not care how famous yesterday was. Supply lines watch rotations, treaties, honored ambushes, avoided, wounded, carried. The southern kings fall then, a northern coalition hardens, like storm cloud and breaks. Israel advances not by spectacle, but by steady obedience, an inching faith that refuses drift. Caleb's hair silvers. His stride stays honest. He learns to love brief fires at night more than victory songs, spaces where men tell truth and scrape sand from their souls. Therefore, fatigue has to be managed like an enemy, but not every fix is louder drums and sharper spears. Sometimes it is sharing bread, remembering names, rereading the covenant by lamplight. Joshua's orders are clear and unhurried. Patrols return with dust in their eyebrows and stories in their fists. The land begins to rest from war, not because every enemy vanished, but because patterns of obedience took root deeper than panic. Not everything is conquest. Some days are repair days, restringing bows, mending sandals, teaching boys to hold a line, teaching girls to keep a household brave. Therefore, the middle chapters demand a broader definition of valor. But they also expose impatience. People want a climax every Friday. Caleb keeps pointing at the long arc. Promise is a marathon with battles as mile markers, not the whole course. He stands on ridges and reads the terrain the way a shepherd reads weather. This is still God's campaign, he tells the young. Don't measure success by noise. There's a rhythm to faithful advance, pray, plan, move, clean up, remember? Repeat. Therefore endurance becomes liturgy, but liturgy without heart curdles into habit. So they keep the stories fresh. Jordan's walls of water, Jericho's collapse, eyes humbling and reset. Memory is oxygen in the long haul, and when a town surrenders without a fight, they receive it without gloating. When a skirmish goes crooked, they correct without despair. The point is not to never falter. It is to never unlearn. The historian will summarize these chapters in a paragraph. The veterans will carry them in their bones. Years later, when Caleb asks for a mountain, it won't be nostalgia speaking. It will be the voice of a man trained by 1,000 unglamorous obediences to trust God with one more hard thing. Most of life lives in the middle chapters. Build a repeatable rhythm, pray plan, move cleanup, remember, and let endurance turn isolated wins into a lived way of faith. The land measuring crews crisscross the plains like ants with strings calling out boundary markers, chalking lines on leather maps. Camp murmurs with inheritance math tribes, clans, families, all waiting to hear where they'll pitch their future. Therefore most men angle for good soil and gentle valleys. But one figure moves through the assembly with the calm of a man on a mission older than the survey. Caleb. He doesn't clear his throat to be dramatic. He clears it to be precise. You know the word the Lord spoke to Moses concerning me. He begins no legend polish, just receipts. He names dates. He names places. He names promises. Kadesh, 45 years. I brought him back a report according to my convictions, he says. And you hear the hinge of a life, not the crowd's fear, not the trend's mood, the truth he stood in when stones were in hands. Therefore he frames courage as fidelity, not personality. But fidelity without follow-through is nostalgia. He's here to cash a promise by walking into its cost. He refuses self-mythology. My brothers made the people's hearts melt, he admits. No, I told you so. No costume of hero. Just a man who followed fully and kept following when nothing seemed to move. He points at his body without boasting. I'm as strong now as then for war and going out and coming in. Translation: strength is what obedience leaves behind. After long years, test it. Therefore he asks plainly, give me this hill country, where the Anakim are with large fortified cities. But he tethers the ask to dependence. It may be that the Lord will be with me, and I shall drive them out. The outcome is God's. The request is his. Joshua's eyes carry decades too. Plagues, seas, deserts, walls. He hears the cadence of truth he's trusted since youth and rests his hands on Caleb's shoulders. Blessing is not sentiment. It is a formal recognition of alignment. Therefore authority endorses obedience and puts wind at its back. But blessing doesn't bulldoze difficulty. Everyone can see Hebron's ridges. Everyone remembers the old fear. The moment is both ceremony and summons. Application lands like a low drum when it's your turn to speak for your future. Bring receipts, not rhetoric. Name what God said where he said it, when you obeyed what you learned in the delay. Therefore your ask won't sound like ambition. It will sound like stewardship. But be ready to want the hard place most tied to your calling. Easy ground rarely carries legacy weight. You can feel the younger fighters listening. They've seen Caleb in the desert, teaching boys to pull tent lines straight and girls to sing truth like armor. Now they see him make the same choices with a city in view. Therefore discipleship finally looks like muscle memory under pressure. But they still need a picture of after. Caleb gives it not just a taken hill, but a lived hill. Spring-secured daughters, honored sons-in-law, commissioned the next generation inheriting a rhythm, not just a rumor. He finishes without flourish. No victory lap. Just the next step. Hebron will not hand him a welcome basket. He will climb. He will bleed. He will rest on rocks and drink from canteens and laugh in the dark with young men who didn't know they could be this brave, until an old man asked for a hard thing and let them help. That's what testimony's supposed to do, turn memory into momentum for a community. When you step forward to claim your calling, bring the receipts of long obedience, ask for the hill tied to your promise, and anchor the outcome in God, not your resume. Hebron is not a single gate. It is a knot of high towns. Hebron proper, with its terraces and tombs and satellite fortresses, like Sheshai-Ahiman and Talmais, holds Anakim outposts, watching each other from cliff to cliff. Therefore, a frontal charge would spend men on vanity. But a layered problem invites layered courage. Caleb convenes captains on a chalk-scraped rock and lays out a simple, stubborn plan: cut the ridgeline, sever the signals, force each stronghold to fight alone. We're not here to look heroic, he says. We're here to win clean. He builds a team on purpose. Othniel Young's steady eyes gets the spear tip assignment. Achan, Caleb's daughter, moves through camp, taking stock of water points and supply paths. She is not ornamental leadership, she's logistics with a heartbeat. Therefore, courage multiplies because it includes gifts beyond swords. But swords still have to sing. Scouts count sentry rotations, map goat trails that become infantry lanes, and chalk the places where rock gives bad footing. We fight gravity and giants, one scout grins. So bring extra will. Night wraps the hills in animal breath and coyote cry. On Caleb's signal, 3 columns flow uphill like shadow. No horns, no boasts. Only the hush of men who trained their feet in wilderness monotony, now spending that discipline at speed. The first objective is a relay tower, a squat tooth of stone used to flash warnings along the ridge. Therefore, they take it without theatrics and blanket its fire, but the quiet victory is enormous. The Anakim will wake to local problems, not a coordinated defense. Momentum so often, a rumor becomes a tool. Dawn finds Othniel's column pressed against the lower wall of a satellite town. Ladders go up with the soft grammar of muscle and breath. A sentry shouts. The shout dies under a palm. Inside the wall, streets coil like snakes, perfect for ambushes. So Caleb's orders stand, stay paired, keep sightlines, do not chase glory around blind corners. Therefore, the fight stays disciplined. But it is still intimate and loud, shield on shield, grit on teeth, the thud of men meeting architecture. By mid-morning, the gate groans outward from within and spills panic downhill. Hebron proper answers with a counter-push tower. Archers stitching the slope with arrows, a ram's horn blare, trying to recollect scattered nerve. Caleb steps into the pocket where courage is contagious. He's not faster than the young. He's steadier than fear. He signals a pivot, 2 squads swing wide, climb a goat trail missed by the maps, and arise behind the archers like bad news. Therefore, height flips allegiance, but surprise alone doesn't finish wars. Street by street they press, always closing, never sprinting, always together. The giants themselves, Sheshai-Ahiman Talmai, are not myths. They are mass and muscle kings of intimidation who have owned this skyline for years. Caleb refuses the theater of single combat. He refuses the romance of me versus the giant. Therefore, he fights as a body shields interlocked angles, exploited knees targeted, breath controlled. But there is still a moment when a corridor narrows and a figure like a door frame fills it with a roar. The old man steps forward because leaders belong where decisions are sharpest. Weight meets will. The exchange is brutal, short, decisive. By afternoon, banners drop from towers like exclamation points. The valley hears a new grammar, not the taunts of giants, but the steady cadence of orders to clear alleys, secure wells, post watches. Achan moves again through the aftermath, reading the city like a ledger, cistern, depth, spring flow, terrace stability. Therefore, victory becomes livable. But if they do not secure water, they will inherit a trophy they can't keep. She brings the ask that will become a proverb. Give me also springs, upper and lower source, and run, because courage must be sustainable. Caleb calls the team to the patriarch's tombs at twilight. No plunder parade, no hero speeches. They stand where Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob lay, where promise first put down roots in this soil. Therefore the win is framed, not flaunted. We do not own this by muscle. We steward it by mercy. He posts a rota for the nights ahead, aware that strongholds die hard, but he also posts a rota for telling the story to children, because fear returns fastest where memory is thin. Water-secured wells named roots-mapped mentors assigned Hebron shifts from headline to home. Big hills fall to shared courage and simple plans. Name the ridge, assign the lanes, fight together, and secure the springs, so your victory is livable, not just loud. The first nights in Hebron smell like lime dust and fresh-cut rope. Victory always needs carpenters. Therefore hammers replace war cries, and the music of the city becomes repair cistern lids. Reset doors, rehung terraces, restacked where battles shook the stone. But courage cannot live on adrenaline. It needs water. Achan walks the slopes with a surveyor's eye, tracing the dry creek beds, with her finger measuring flow by memory and by hope. If we are to raise children on this ridge, she tells her father, we need more than a wall. We need springs. Caleb nods. He is not the kind of victor who confuses a hard-won address with a habitable life. When Achan asks boldly, plainly for the upper and lower springs, he does not scold her for ambition. He blesses it because sustainability is not selfishness, it is stewardship. Therefore, the city's future is written in water, not just banners, but the lesson hides under the surface. The same man who swung a sword must now secure a source. The best warriors can become fathers and city builders without feeling demoted. They know the point of winning is living well in what was won. Hebron learns a new rhythm. Morning prayers at the tombs of Abraham and Sarah. Midday work on terraces that will hold vineyards instead of fear. Evening storytelling where boys who swung swords yesterday now carry jars, and girls who mapped water tables now teach the names of wells. Therefore memory is resharpened for peacetime, not shelved. But memory must be honest to be useful. They do not erase the defeated I from the story. They rehearse it too, because future courage collapses when we only pass down our highlight reel. Here's where we rushed, the elders say. Here's where we repented. Here's the altar we built. Achan's marriage to Othniel becomes a picture of joined strengths, tactics and logistics, blade and blueprint. He will later judge Israel with a quiet steadiness learned on these slopes. But for now he inspects walls while she inspects water. Therefore, legacy is not a speech handed to the next generation. It is a practiced way they inherit by repetition. But repetition without heart becomes stale. So they lace their drills with worship and their worship with drills. Children run from spring to spring, reciting names like a hopscotch Negev source, upper flow, lower run. The city itself becomes catechism. Caleb's body, honest about its years, makes choices accordingly. He stops the work he could do faster so that others can learn to do it at all. He tells the story in shorter lines so younger lungs can carry it. Therefore, he becomes smaller so the future can become larger. But he does not disappear. When disputes flare over boundary stones or water shares, he steps in not with threats, with the weight of someone who bled for these terraces and will not let pettiness rot them. Holiness does not retire, it retools. Zoom 2 now. After a crisis, a recovery, a reconciliation, a big win, our lives also need springs. The upper spring is soul practice prayer that doesn't depend on mood scripture, that feeds more than it flatters Sabbath, that protects what matters. The lower spring is system practice calendars, budgets, workflows, conversations that keep peace from leaking. Therefore, courage becomes a culture, not a stunt. But culture requires refusal. A refusal to let sarcasm pass for wisdom, exhaustion pass for devotion, or nostalgia pass for vision. Name the wells. Guard them. On a blue morning, Caleb walks the ridge with a boy who asks fearless questions. Were the giants really that tall? Did your hands shake? Why ask for the hardest hill? Caleb laughs, then answers without varnish. Yes, yes. Because God said not to humiliate fear, but to free the future from it. Therefore the boy inherits a world where truth and tenderness live in the same sentence, but he also inherits tasks: check the sluice, mend the fence, return the tool. Glory is maintenance too. By the year's end, Hebron sounds less like triumph and more like home. Vine leaves tick and whisper. Goats complain. Water mouths the lips of stone. At night the city glows like a patient constellation, a portrait of what happens when courage refuses to retire into legend, and instead gets busy installing faucets. Caleb sits where the wind tastes like rain and smiles the smile of a man who wanted a hill and ended up with a people who can live on one. Springs sing below, above the stars. Between them, a legacy calibrated to last. Win the hill, then make it livable. Ask for Spring's habits and systems that keep faith fresh and pass them on so the next generation inherits courage. They can drink not just stories, they can quote. What do you do with a story about an 85-year-old taking a mountain? You translate it into days you can actually live. Not everyone faces Anakim with iron and oak. Most of us face inboxes, hospital corridors, hard conversations, long slogs that don't trend. Therefore, we need courage we can practice. But practice needs a pattern. Caleb gives us 1-5 rules each with a rhythm. What about setbacks? Expect an AI. Name it early, repent quickly, rebuild publicly, and keep marching. Your failure isn't final unless you use it to justify quitting. The point of these rules isn't to make you impressive. It's to make you faithful on Monday mornings in budget meetings, at hospital bedsides, in long parenting nights, at quiet graves. If you're older and feel late, Caleb did not apologize for his age. He stewarded his years. You are not behind, you are equipped. If you're younger and feel small, don't wait to feel brave. Practice micro-bravery now. Borrow courage from older saints, then become the lender. The closing question is the opening one, turned toward you. What's your mountain this year, and who will climb it with you? Put it in the comments. Name your next clear thing. Name your springs. Someone scanning the thread may borrow your courage the way a generation borrowed Caleb's. Courage is a method you can practice. Remember specifically. Obey the next clear thing. Ask for the right hard hill share. Courage in community and install springs, so wins become a way of life.